In 1971, a major Hollywood studio put a contract on the table in front of Bruce Lee. More money than he had ever been offered, more than his family would need for a decade. A guaranteed path to the kind of American stardom that every actor in that city was chasing with everything they had. He read it, sat with it, and pushed it back across the table. The studio executive asked why. Bruce Lee's answer was so unexpected, so completely outside the vocabulary of how people talked about careers and money and ambition in that room, that the executive sat in silence for almost a full minute before he could respond. What Bruce Lee said that afternoon eventually reached every corner of Hollywood, and the people who heard it said it changed how they thought about success. Not just in film, in everything. This is that story. The dream that almost wasn't his. To understand why Bruce Lee refused that contract, you need to understand what Hollywood had already done to him. Not the Hollywood of 1971, the Hollywood of 1966, of 1967, of the years before the world caught up with what he was. He had come to America with something specific in mind. Not fame exactly, not wealth. Something more precise than either of those things. He wanted to change what was possible. To walk onto an American screen as an Asian man and be the hero. Not the sidekick, not the villain, not the exotic background detail. The hero. The industry told him no. Politely at first, then less politely. They told him he was too Chinese for American audiences. Then they told him he was too American for Chinese audiences. They put him in the Green Hornet as Kato, the sidekick, the assistant, the man who stood behind the white lead and occasionally did impressive things before stepping back. He did it. He was professional. He was brilliant at it. And audiences saw immediately that Kato was more interesting than the Green Hornet by a factor that the producers found alarming. Letters came in asking why the sidekick wasn't the star. The producers were not moved. Bruce Lee kept working, kept training, kept writing in those notebooks, and kept carrying the specific, undiminished vision of what he was trying to build. Not just for himself, but for every person who looked like him and had been told the same thing by the same industry. And then 1971 arrived, and with it, the contract. The meeting and the offer. The meeting was arranged through intermediaries, a studio with a project, a role that had been written with Bruce Lee specifically in mind, or so they said. The kind of thing that gets said in those rooms regardless of its accuracy. Bruce Lee arrived on time. He was always on time. Punctuality was for him a form of respect, for other people's time and for his own. The executive was warm, enthusiastic. He had clearly done his homework. He knew the martial arts background, the television work, the growing reputation. He spoke about vision and opportunity and the changing landscape of American cinema. Then he pushed the contract across the table. Bruce Lee picked it up, read it carefully. The way he read everything, completely, without rushing, giving it the full attention it deserved before forming any opinion. The money was real, substantial, the kind of number that changes what is possible in a life. He read the character description, the role they had written, and something in his face changed. Not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself, just a small, specific shift that the executive noticed and couldn't quite interpret. Bruce Lee set the contract down, folded his hands on top of it, and said, "Tell me about this character, what the character actually was." The executive described it with the particular enthusiasm of someone who has convinced himself something is better than it is. The character was Asian, martial arts expert, mysterious, dangerous, operating in the shadows, speaking in short, cryptic sentences that gestured toward ancient wisdom without ever saying anything that could be pinned down as an actual thought. He was, in the language of that era's Hollywood, exotic. He existed to be impressive in a way that made the white lead look brave for standing next to him. He had no family in the script, no history that mattered to the plot, no desire beyond serving the mission. He was, in the most fundamental sense, a function dressed in a man's clothing, a very well-paid function. Bruce Lee listened to all of this without interrupting, His face was still, attentive, giving nothing away. When the executive finished, he asked two questions. First, does this character want anything for himself? The executive hesitated, said something about the character wanting to complete the mission. Bruce Lee nodded, said, "That is the mission's want, not his. What does he want?" The executive started to answer, stopped, started again. He didn't have an answer, because the writers hadn't given the character one, because it hadn't occurred to anyone in the room where the script was developed that the question needed answering. Bruce Lee asked his second question. If you remove this character from the film entirely, what would be lost besides the action sequences? The silence that followed was the answer. If you love Bruce Lee stories, subscribe. I post rare stories every day. The reason, spoken plainly. Bruce Lee slid the contract back across the table. The executive looked at it, then looked at him, and said, "I don't understand. This is a significant offer. This could open every door in this industry for you." Bruce Lee said, "Which doors?" The executive gestured broadly. "Hollywood, films, the whole machinery of it." Bruce Lee said, "I have been in this industry for 5 years. I have watched it open doors for people who look like me. I know which doors it opens, and I know what is behind them." He leaned forward slightly. "I will not spend my career teaching Hollywood how to make Asian men invisible more efficiently. That is what this role does. It takes everything that is real and specific and human about a person and replaces it with impressiveness. And impressiveness that serves someone else's story is just a more expensive version of invisibility." The executive started to respond. Bruce Lee held up one hand, not rudely, just indicating he wasn't finished. "I have one career, one chance to put something on screen that says to every person who looks like me, you are the story. Not the backdrop, not the atmosphere, not the exotic detail, the story. I will not spend that chance on this." He stood, extended his hand, shook the executive's hand with the warmth and firmness that was always present in his handshakes. Then he walked out. What heterogeneous the executive sat alone with the contract for a long time after Bruce Lee left. His assistant came in 20 minutes later and found him still sitting there, still looking at the document, as if it had become something different from what it was when he put it on the table. The assistant asked what happened. The executive said, "He turned us down." The assistant asked why. The executive was quiet for another moment, then said something that the assistant repeated for years afterward to people who asked about that meeting. He said, "He told me the character wasn't a person. He told me we had written a function and called it a man. And the worst part is that he was completely right, and I knew it the moment he said it, and I don't know how I didn't see it before he walked in here." He picked up the contract, looked at it. "We do this all the time," he said. "We do it with every character who isn't white, and we don't even notice we're doing it because we've been doing it so long it looks normal." He set it down. That man just refused enough money to change his life because he refused to participate in something that looked normal. And I'm sitting here with a contract that suddenly looks like something else entirely. He told his assistant to call the writers. The script needed work, real work, not because Bruce Lee had pressured him, because Bruce Lee had made him see something he could no longer unsee. The months that followed, the bet on himself. Turning down that contract was not a small thing. Bruce Lee had a family, a mortgage, a future that required money to exist. He was not independently wealthy. He was not turning down one offer while 10 others waited. He was turning down a real opportunity in an industry that had already shown it was willing to ignore him indefinitely. Linda Lee would later say that the months after that meeting were not easy. Not financially, not emotionally. The decision was right. She never doubted that he believed it was right. But right decisions do not always feel comfortable in the immediate aftermath. He went back to Hong Kong, not in defeat, in strategy. If Hollywood would not make the film he wanted to make, he would make it himself. Or he would make it somewhere that would let him make it. He went to Golden Harvest. He made The Big Boss, then Fist of Fury, then Way of the Dragon, which he wrote, directed, and starred in. Complete creative control. His story, his character, his vision of what an Asian man could be on screen. The films broke records across Asia. The numbers that came back to Hollywood were not small. They were not numbers you could ignore or explain away or attribute to an anomaly. They were the numbers of an audience that had been waiting for exactly this for a very long time. An audience that Hollywood had been telling itself did not exist. Bruce Lee had known the audience existed. He had bet everything on it, and he had been right. Enter the Dragon and the Vindication. Hollywood came back. Of course it did. Success is the only language that industry speaks fluently. Warner Brothers, a co-production. Enter the Dragon, a real budget, real distribution. And this time, crucially, non-negotiably, the condition on which everything else depended, Bruce Lee as the lead. Not the sidekick, not the exotic detail, the lead. The character he played in Enter the Dragon was everything the rejected contracts character was not. He had a history, a family, his sister whose fate drove the entire story, a moral code that was his own and not borrowed from the plot's convenience. Desires, grief, the specific, irreducible humanity that separates a person from a function. He was, on that screen, a man, a complete man, in a way that had simply not been seen before in that context. The film was released in 1973. Bruce Lee died 1 month before it opened. He never saw the lines around the block, never saw the numbers, never saw the industry that had turned him down, quietly revising its understanding of what was possible and who it was possible for. But he had known. He had always known. That is why he turned down the contract. Not because he was reckless with the future, because he trusted his own understanding of the truth more than he trusted the industry's understanding of what was safe. That is a different kind of courage than physical courage, and it is rarer. If you love Bruce Lee stories, subscribe. I post rare stories every day. The climax, what he wrote in his journal that night. The night after he turned down the contract, Bruce Lee wrote in his journal, not about the meeting, not about the money, not about the decision or the doubt or the financial reality of what he had just done. He wrote about a conversation he remembered from his childhood. His father telling him something about the difference between a man who sells his voice and a man who uses it. He had been too young to fully understand it then. He understood it now. He wrote, "A man who sells his presence to fill someone else's absence is not present at all. He is an expensive ghost. Today I chose not to be a ghost." He closed the journal, went to train, because training was how he thought, and he had a great deal to think through, but the line stayed. His family found it years later. Linda read it and said immediately, "That is exactly who he was. In one sentence, that is exactly who he was. An expensive ghost." He had been offered the money to become one, and he had said no, because he understood, with a clarity that most people spend their entire lives failing to arrive at, that presence is not something you can sell and buy back later. You either have it or you have traded it away. And once it is traded, the thing you are left with, no matter how much it earns, no matter how impressive it looks from the outside, is hollow in a way that no amount of success can fill. The moral hit, the thing this is actually about. Here is the question this story is actually asking. Not about Hollywood, not about representation or race, or the film industry's long history of getting things profoundly wrong. The real question is simpler and harder and more personal than any of that. How many of us have taken the contract? Not a literal contract, but the version that exists in every field in every life. The offer that says, here is money, here is security, here is the approval of people whose approval matters. And all it requires is that you make yourself slightly smaller, slightly less specific, slightly less insistently yourself. Most people take it. Most people take it because the money is real and the security is real, and the cost seems abstract until you are living inside it, and suddenly it doesn't feel abstract at all. Bruce Lee didn't take it, not because he was fearless, he wasn't. Not because the money didn't matter, it did. But because he understood something that most people understand too late or not at all. The version of you that fits comfortably into someone else's story is not the version of you that changes anything. And he had not come this far. Through the training, the injury, the 18 months flat on his back, the years of doors closed in his face, to become a function. He had come to be a man, on screen, in the world, completely and without apology. And that is exactly what he was.